So tonight we're going to have a talk, several talks, and an interview on high-power microwave tube development that happened here on the peninsula at Stanford, and then continued at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center for the SLC and the devices there. And we have panelists David Leeson, Richard Winkler, Alan Odian, Paul Edwards, and George Karyotakis, who will join us by audio because he didn't drive down from above Sacramento because of the rainstorm. But our first, the outline for the evening, I'm going to give you just a couple of slides on the background of Silicon Valley as it was in those the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Then Dave Leeson's going to talk about the Bill Hansen years. This is the critical technology development period, and he'll talk about what happened during that period of time, what it was influenced by World War II, the labs at MIT and Harvard. And then Dick Winkler will talk about the 2-megawatt klystron that he developed as a thesis project at Stanford. Alan Odian will talk about the early days of SLAC as it was being developed. He was on the science end of it, but has a lot of good stories to tell about those days. Paul Edwards is going to show you some of the pieces that were the improvements for the klystrons that were developed locally to make them better and more powerful. And then we'll have George Karyotakis talking about how he got into klystrons, became sort of Mr. Klystron, came to SLAC in 1990 and worked on the X-band klystron. So that's going to be our outline for tonight. And we're going to start off with a little bit of early history. First of all, what happened in the early days? I have a talk that probably many of you have seen on the origins of Silicon Valley going back to 1910, and I recommend you take a look at that for why we ended up being the business and technology driver for technology in the world. There are also some early interviews. The early history of Silicon Valley was a panel that we had here a year and a half ago. You can look that up on the Silicon Valley Tech History website. The URL is given there. There's also one on Silicon Valley's semiconductor industry, also at that same location. Those are worth going back to and seeing if you're interested in that early technology. Well, what happened here? Well, we had the sinking of the Titanic. That's a little over 100 years ago, which made radio communication seem very important to people. There were a lot of developments during World War I, and following World War I, all the radio technology was bundled under an umbrella group called RCA, Radio Corporation of America, which licensed it out to true U.S. companies. We didn't happen to have any on the West Coast because we sold radio gear internationally, so they would not sell us tubes. They certainly would not let us make the tubes that infringed their patents. And so you see here the Odeon, that was a early development of Lee DeForest, the glass lathe from Charlie Litton that made high production precision parts possible in tubes, the garage where Hewlett-Packard got together and developed some of the signature products, and a typical tube. But one of the characteristics that we had here was a combination of competition and cooperation, which was fostered by the ham radio community in the early days. Later in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the Homebrew Computer Club, meetups, things like that. It's probably in the water we drink here. It's something that happens locally that doesn't seem to happen in other parts of the country. And that has resulted in some fantastic technology developments in tubes. So we're going to talk tonight about microwave tubes, but also the applications for those. Radar, the Linear Accelerator Center, and big science, medical electronics, lots of things grew out of this. So Dr. David Leeson got his BS from Caltech and a master's in electrical engineering from MIT, and then did his PhD at Stanford. And he didn't stick around Stanford. He joined Applied Technology for a few years. Then he founded his own company, California Microwave, and he was there from '68 when he founded it, became CEO until '93, when he gracefully retired and decided to have more fun with life, although he had fun during those days, racing cars and doing ham radio. We may talk about that. He's an IEEE Life Fellow, and he's working on a book. This has been a passion of his for the last few years, on the untold story of Bill Hansen, and he's going to tell you some of the highlights of that tonight as they affect the development of microwave tubes and the technology that came out of those tubes.